Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Kalanati. Today I am back at it with talking about upcoming releases, this time from April, May, and June, that I am most excited for. I have pared down my list to 12 titles to talk to you about, so no further preamble, let's get into it. April is going to be a busy month. The first one on April 3rd is Ursula K Le Guin, Conversations on Writing with David Naimon. This is described as a series of interviews in which Le Guin discusses craft, aesthetics, and philosophy in her fiction, poetry, and nonfiction respectively. If there's anything you need to know about me at this point, if you don't already know, it's that I love Ursula Le Guin. I will read anything that she wrote or anything where she talks about genre and her craft in particular. And it sounds like this is that thing. And it sounds pretty timely as well, considering she passed away in January of 2018. This would be perhaps her last look back on her career. Also coming out on April 3rd is Space Opera by Katherine M Valente, which is described as The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy meets Eurovision. In fact, I think this book is mainly inspired by Eurovision. I gather that Valente is a huge fan of that spectacle. Now, I like the pitch of this because I enjoy the humor of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I do know what Eurovision is, but I've never watched it, and I'm a very boring American who doesn't have access to a lot of this stuff. But I do know what Eurovision is and some of the wackier things that happens every year with that. So that's why I find this appealing, and the fact that it's Valente, it feels to me like every book she publishes is vastly different from her previous ones, and she pulls them all off really well. This has a pretty long description, but I'm gonna go for it. A century ago, the Sentient Wars tore the galaxy apart and nearly ended the entire concept of intelligent spacefaring life. In the aftermath, a curious tradition was invented, something to cheer up everyone who is left and bring the shattered worlds together in the spirit of peace, unity, and understanding. Once every cycle, the civilizations gather for the Metagalactic Grand Prix, part gladiatorial contest, part beauty pageant, part concert extravaganza, and part continuation of the wars of the past. This year, though, humankind has discovered the enormous universe, and instead of fighting for its destiny, it's gonna sing for it. It sounds outrageous and fun, and I'm really ready for it. Next is one of my most anticipated books of the entire year. If I had to have just a top 5, this would probably be number 1, actually. And that is Before Mars by Emma Newman, which is coming out on April 17th. And this is another book in the same world as Planetfall and After Atlas. I think in some ways all the books in this series can be read like standalones. They don't have to be read in any particular order, but there is definitely something happening in the background, like an overall story that might tie them all together. So the description of this one is that a woman travels to Mars for her job as a geologist and as an artist in residence, and she leaves her husband and baby behind on Earth. And then it sounds like strange things start happening to her on Mars. It sounds like she's being gaslighted, which will be an interesting element if that's actually what's happening, considering that the other 2 books in this series have really focused on mental health and mental illness and psychological problems and needs of the characters. So really this woman doesn't know if she is losing her mind or if there is some elaborate conspiracy plot happening and she has been caught in the middle of it. I loved the first 2 books in this world so much, and I expect that this will be much the same. Coming on April 19th is Head On by John Scalzi, which I'm very happy to have a review copy of. This is set in the same universe as Lock-In, though I don't know if it can be read as a direct sequel. It's described as a standalone near-future thriller, so you could probably jump in right away with it if you want to. I've been looking forward to this ever since I read Lock-In because it was one of the first books I ever read by Scalzi. It was part of my introduction to his writing style and humor, and I really enjoyed it. I wanted to know more. So this is what the description says. Hilketa is a frenetic and violent pastime where players attack each other with swords and hammers. The main goal of the game, obtain your opponent's head and carry it through the goalposts. With flesh and bone bodies, a sport like this would be impossible, but all the players are threeps. Robot-like bodies controlled by people with Hayden syndrome, so anything goes. No one gets hurt, but the brutality is real and the crowds love it. Until an up-and-coming athlete drops on the playing field. Is it an accident or murder? FBI agents for Hayden affairs Chris Shane and Leslie Vann are called in to uncover the truth, and in doing so travel to the darker side of the fast-growing sport of Hilketa, where fortunes are made or lost, and where players or owners do whatever it takes to win on and off the field. One thing that I did not know when I read Lock In, but I do know now, is that Chris Shane was purposefully written in Lock In so that his or her gender isn't obvious. I've always assumed that Chris Shane was a man, but I wonder if the same thing will continue in this book, and I'll be looking out for signs of that. The last title from April that I'm really looking forward to is Time Was by Ian McDonald, which is coming out from Tor.com Publishing on April 24th. So I believe this one is a novella. So this is described as, in the heart of World War II, Tom and Ben became lovers. Brought together by a secret project designed to hide British targets from German radar, the two founded a love that could not be revealed. When the project went wrong, Tom and Ben vanished into nothingness, presumed dead. Their bodies were never found. Now the two are lost in time, hunting each other across decades, leaving clues in books of poetry and trying to make their desperate timelines overlap. The two elements of this that I find very interesting is just the premise of soldiers falling in love during wartime, which is not an experience that I have read about that much, certainly not in speculative fiction. The second thing is that this doesn't sound like your ordinary time travel story. It's people becoming unmoored in time because of an accident and trying to get their timelines to match up again. Another thing I've noticed about McDonald is that all of the stories I've read by him and all of the ones that are on my to-read list feature queer protagonists, you know, like at least one of the characters, but sometimes all of them are queer. And I can't think of another male science fiction or fantasy author who does that so consistently in all of their works. I don't know why it is, but it's something I've really come to appreciate. Moving on to May releases now, the first one is Artificial Condition by Martha Wells, which comes out on May 8th. This is the direct sequel to All Systems Red, and the series is about a security robot that goes rogue after hacking its governor module. In this one, our robot, who's called itself Murderbot, heads off to investigate the massacre that led it to dub itself Murderbot. Essentially, Murderbot wants to find out what actually happened during this event and how it may or may not have been responsible, which is key to it understanding itself as a person and what it's capable of. One of the things that I loved about this, because I have already read it as an ARC, is that Murderbot does team up with another bot, a research transport called ART. The A stands for the expletive you think it might, because Murderbot is cranky like that. And I really enjoyed this second artificial intelligence just as much as Murderbot in many ways. It was nice to see Murderbot kind of making a friend and acting more like an actual person, whereas before it had been pretending to still be a security unit. So I loved it and I plan on reading it again in the near future. This next release is a bit of an oddity for me because as far as I know, it's not science fiction, fantasy, spec fic, or mystery, which is what I usually read, but it is So Lucky by Nicola Griffith, which is coming out on May 15th. This is a short novel about a professionally successful woman who is diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and how that changes her life. The description says, "This is fiction from the front lines that rips through sentiment to expose the savagery of America's treatment of the disabled and chronically ill." So Lucky is an Own Voices novel since Nicola Griffith herself has been diagnosed with MS and she's lived with it for decades in the US. And I believe that Griffith has also been very vocal in the past couple of years about the representation of disability in fiction. So all of that, plus the fact that I have loved some of her science fiction novels, I love how she writes, means that I am going to try out this book even though it's a bit outside of my usual reading range. Next up, also coming out on May 15th, is one of my most anticipated sequels of the year, and that is Armistice by Laura Elena Donnelly. This is the sequel to Amarillo, which was one of my favorite books of 2017. So the description says that Armistice returns to Donnelly's ravishing 1930s Art Deco-tinged fantasy world of Amarillo with a decadent, tumultuous mixture of sex, politics, and spies. In a tropical country where shadowy political affairs lurk behind the scenes of its glamorous film industry, three people maneuver inside a high-stakes game of statecraft and espionage. So I believe that this series overall is about the rise of a fascist state and the people who attempt to fight it from within and from outside. I am very excited. I can't wait for the return of some of the characters and maybe the introduction of a couple of new ones as well. And lastly for May is a book whose publication date I'm not entirely sure about. This is How to Marry a Werewolf by Gail Carriger. Amazon and Goodreads tell me this comes out on May 31st, but Carriger's website says May 13th, and I don't know which one is right or if one of them got transposed instead. I will find out eventually though because I have it pre-ordered. So How to Marry a Werewolf is the first novella in the Claw and Courtship series, which I think Carriger is self-publishing. So these are described as standalone romances in the Parasol-verse concerning werewolves in cravats and the women who love them. So basically, if you know the members of the London Pack and you want to see them find love, this is the series for you. This story is about a woman named Faith whose reputation was ruined in the eyes of English society, probably because of werewolves. So she travels to America seeking a marriage of convenience and revenge. Now, the werewolf in question in the story is Major Channing. I think that Channing is an ass, but hopefully he finds the right woman who brings out his more appealing side. The last three titles on my list are all June releases, and two of them are coming out on June 12th. The first one is Shelter: Tales of the Aftermath by Dave Hutchinson, which is described as rural English post-apocalyptic fiction. While I am not usually attracted to the term post-apocalyptic, it's by Dave Hutchinson, and I love his Fractured Europe novels, and while I am waiting for the fourth and final book in that series to come out, I have Shelter to tide me over. This says, the long autumn is coming to an end. For almost a century after the coming of the sisters, the surviving peoples of rain-swept England have huddled in small communities and on isolated farms, scavenging the remains of the old society. But now, society, of a kind, is starting to rebuild itself. After decades of simply trying to survive, the battle to inherit this brutal new world is beginning. So it might be pretty brutal. I'm not entirely sure if this is a novel or a collection of stories because the subtitle is Tales of the Aftermath, but I will definitely pick this one up and give it a shot. And the second one coming out on June 12th is, of course, Revenant Gone by Yoon Lee, another one of my most anticipated books of the year. This is the conclusion to the Machineries of Empire series that began with Nine Fox Gambit. I won't read the whole description of this one to avoid spoilers, but it sounds like Jadao is woken up again, but this time he returns as his teenage self without any memory of the terrible things he did when he was older or his time in the Black Cradle, and he is told to reconquer the Hex Arcade, fighting against people who know much more about him than he does. I'm pretty sure this will be a brilliant conclusion to a series that I've loved so far. And the last book on my list is actually a repeat. This is Summerland by Hannu Rajaniemi, which comes out on June 28th. This one was actually on my list last year, but the publication date was bumped for a whole year, but it seems like it's actually coming out this time. So it's set in an alternate timeline in 1958 in a world where World War II never happened and the armies of the afterlife conquered the world of the living. A gifted young medium and a bastard daughter of Harry Houdini discover a map of the other side that could break their power. So this sounds like a dark fantasy tale of a revolution against the dead. Once again, I'm not usually attracted to darker fantasy or brutal stories, but I am very hungry for the next Hannu Rajaniemi novel. It's been a couple of years, so I will take whatever I can get, and it does sound like a very interesting premise. And that is it! Those are the 12 books that I am most looking forward to from April, May, and June of 2018. Do let me know if you are anticipating any of these same books, or if there's anything that I haven't mentioned here that you are really looking forward to yourself. Thank you very much for watching once again, and I will talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.